I wasn't supposed to be home that night. My company had organized one of those corporate events that dragged on for hours. Awards, speeches, handshakes, all that jazz. I remember standing there, suited up, sipping on a whiskey that tasted more like watered-down regret. But somewhere between a long-winded speech about company milestones and a stale plate of shrimp, I decided I had enough. I slipped out early, grabbed my coat, and hailed a cab. I wasn't rushing home because I missed my wife, Angela. If I'm being honest, our marriage had been coasting on autopilot lately. Not bad enough to leave, not good enough to feel alive. It was just there, like a background hum you forget about until something changes the frequency. The house was dark when I pulled into the driveway. The porch light flickered, casting a strange glow over the lawn. Everything looked normal, too normal, the way life often does right before it decides to sucker punch you. I stepped inside, kicked off my shoes, and headed to the kitchen for a glass of water. The sound of distant laughter drifted down the hallway. I paused, glass halfway to my lips. Laughter at midnight wasn't typical in our house. My mind flicked through possibilities. Was Angela on the phone? Did she invite someone over? But then I heard it again, that unmistakable mix of giggles and whispers. The kind that felt intimate. Setting the glass down, I crept down the hallway, my footsteps light against the hardwood floor. The sound led me to the bedroom, and by the time I reached the door, my heart was pounding harder than it had during the company's softball tournament last summer. I couldn't explain why, but something in me already knew. I didn't knock. I didn't call out her name. I just pushed the door open, and there they were. Angela, my wife of 8 years, tangled up in our bed with the gardener. The kid, because that's what he was really, had just turned 18 last month. His bare back glistened with sweat under the dim glow of the bedside lamp. For a moment, everything froze. It was like my brain had short-circuited, unable to process what my eyes were seeing. Then in a split second, the reality hit me with the force of a train. "You got to be kidding me," I said, my voice barely a whisper, but laced with disbelief. My hands trembled, but I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stood there, paralyzed by the sheer absurdity of it all. The kid scrambled off the bed, clutching a bedsheet around his waist like he'd suddenly realized what shame felt like. Angela, wide-eyed and breathless, didn't move. Her gaze met mine, and I saw it. The horror, the regret, the realization that whatever excuse she had wasn't going to be enough. I didn't know what to say or do, so I laughed. Not the kind of laugh you let out when something's funny, but the kind that escapes when your mind is spiraling and there's nothing else left. It echoed off the walls, filling the room with a sound that didn't belong there. I leave early from a corporate event. I finally managed, wiping the corner of my eye. And this is the reception I get. Angela opened her mouth, but I raised my hand. Don't. Just don't. I couldn't handle whatever excuse was brewing in her head. I needed air. I needed to think. I needed to understand how the woman I thought I knew could be in bed with someone who wasn't old enough to legally buy alcohol. Without another word, I turned and walked out, leaving the door wide open behind me. I didn't bother grabbing my coat or keys. I just walked out the front door, down the driveway, and kept going. The night air was cold enough to sting my skin, but I welcomed it. Anything to drown out the image that was burned into my brain. The tangle of limbs, the way Angela's face contorted when she realized she'd been caught. I hadn't seen that much emotion on her face in months. Funny how betrayal can wake someone up like that. I ended up at the park 3 blocks from our house. The place was empty, except for a swing creaking in the wind. I sat on a bench, leaned forward with my elbows on my knees, and stared at the patchy grass beneath my feet. My mind raced in circles, chasing questions that had no immediate answers. Why him? Why now? Had it been going on for weeks? Months? Longer? The worst part was I couldn't even be angry at the kid. He was young, dumb, and probably thrilled at the thought of hooking up with an older woman. But Angela? My wife, my partner, the woman who swore in front of 100 people that she'd stand by me through better or worse. She knew better. Or at least, I thought she did. I don't know how long I sat there, but eventually, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, half expecting a text from Angela, but it wasn't her. It was my buddy Mark, probably checking in to see why I'd slipped out of the event without saying goodbye. I ignored it and shoved the phone back into my pocket. A car passed by, headlights slicing through the darkness, and for a moment, I thought about calling a cab and finding a hotel for the night. But something about leaving felt too easy. I wanted answers. I deserved them. So, after an hour of sitting in the cold, I made my way back home. The porch light was still flickering, casting weird shadows across the lawn. The kid's car was gone, which meant he had the good sense to leave. I half expected Angela to be waiting by the door, crying and begging for forgiveness, but the house was quiet. Too quiet. I stepped inside and found her in the kitchen, sitting at the table with a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. One full, one empty. She'd changed into an old sweatshirt and yoga pants, her face scrubbed clean of makeup. For a second, she didn't even look like the woman I'd seen in that bedroom earlier. She looked smaller. She didn't say anything as I pulled out a chair and sat across from her. We stared at each other, the silence between us heavier than anything I'd ever felt. Finally, I broke it. "Why?" I asked, my voice steady, but just barely. "Why am—" Angela flinched like the question had physically hurt her. She gripped the stem of the wine glass, her knuckles turning white. "I don't know," she whispered. I leaned back, letting out a bitter laugh. "That's the best you've got? You don't know?" Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't feel sorry for her. "Not yet. He was just there," she said, her voice cracking. "It wasn't about him. It wasn't even about you. I'm lost, and I made a terrible mistake. A terrible mistake. As if this was something that could be erased with an apology and a promise not to do it again." "How long?" I asked. She hesitated, then looked down at the table. "A few weeks." I exhaled sharply and rubbed my hands over my face. "Jesus, Angela. I didn't plan it," she added quickly, as if that made any difference. "It just happened." I wanted to yell, throw something, punch a hole in the wall, but all I could do was sit there and absorb the weight of her words. A few weeks. Long enough for her to make a conscious choice. Long enough for this to be more than a random lapse in judgment. "I don't get it," I said, shaking my head. "We weren't perfect, but this—" Her tears spilled over, streaking down her face. "I know," she sobbed. "I know I ruined everything. But I didn't want to lose you. I still don't." I stared at her, wondering how someone could be so desperate to keep something they'd just set on fire. The room felt suffocating, like the walls were closing in with every second that passed. Angela sat there, tears running down her face, but I couldn't find any sympathy. "Not yet. Maybe not ever. You didn't want to lose me, but you slept with the gardeners?" I repeated, the words sounding even more ridiculous out loud. "He's barely old enough to vote, Angela. What? Was this some midlife crisis thing? Or are you just in a babysitting now?" She winced like I'd slapped her, but I didn't care. I couldn't stop the words from coming. "Did you even think for a second about what this would do to us? Or were you too busy giving life advice to a kid who probably doesn't even know how to do taxes?" Angela wiped her face with her sleeve and sniffled. "I wasn't thinking, okay? I was stupid. I was lonely. You've been so distant lately, and I felt like—" "Don't—" I cut her off, raising my hand. "Don't you dare turn this around on me." Her head dropped, and she stared down at the wine glass like it held the answers she couldn't give me. "I'm not blaming you," she whispered. "I'm just trying to explain." "Explain what?" I leaned forward, my voice low and harsh. "That you were bored, so you decided to ruin our marriage for a thrill? What do you want me to say, Angela? That I understand? That it's okay because you were lonely?" I scoffed. "You could have talked to me. You could have told me how you felt. But instead, you turned our home into a soap opera." She let out a shaky breath, and for a moment, we both just sat there, drowning in the silence. My mind drifted back to the kid. How young he looked, how out of place he seemed in our bedroom. Did he even realize the damage he'd helped cause? Or was he just another clueless pawn in Angela's game of self-destruction? A sudden thought hit me like a punch to the gut. Was this the first time? I asked, my voice quieter now, but no less demanding. Angela's eyes shot up to meet mine, wide and panicked. "Yes," she said quickly. "I swear, it was the first and only time. I studied her face, searching for any sign of a lie. But she looked desperate, raw, like she was teetering on the edge of a cliff, and one more push would send her plummeting. I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to believe that this was just a one-time mistake. But after tonight, trust wasn't something I could hand out freely. And you expect me to believe that? I asked, folding my arms across my chest. I know I don't deserve it, she said, her voice cracking again. But it's the truth. I don't know what else to say. I stood up and paced the kitchen, running my hands through my hair. My thoughts were a tangled mess of anger, confusion, and betrayal. I kept coming back to the same question. Why him? Out of all the people she could have chosen, why the kid who mowed our lawn and trimmed our hedges? The more I thought about it, the more absurd it became. I stopped pacing and turned to face her. So, what was it, Angela? Was he just convenient? Did you catch him shirtless while he was weeding the garden and think, oh, that's what I'm missing in my life? She choked on a sob, but I didn't feel bad. I couldn't. Not after what she'd done. It wasn't like that, she said, shaking her head. I didn't even see him that way at first. But then, I don't know. He listened. He asked me how I was doing. And for once, I felt like someone cared. I laughed bitterly. So, what? You traded 8 years of marriage for some teenager's compliments? It wasn't about the compliments, she shouted, slamming her hand on the table. I made a mistake. A horrible mistake. But I didn't do it because I stopped loving you. I did it because I felt invisible. And I'm not excusing what I did, but if you want to know the truth, there it is. Invisible. The word hung in the air between us, heavy and suffocating. I wanted to tell her that she was wrong, that she'd never been invisible to me. But as I stood there, replaying the last year in my head, I realized something. Maybe she wasn't entirely wrong. I'd buried myself in work, in meetings, in late nights at the office. Not because I didn't love her, but because I thought she understood that everything I did was for us. But somewhere along the line, we'd stopped being a team. And now, here we were, standing on opposite sides of the wreckage, trying to figure out if there was anything left to salvage. I can't fix this tonight, I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. I don't even know if I can fix it at all. Angela nodded slowly, tears still streaming down her face. I just need you to know that I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, and I'll do anything to make it right. I didn't respond. Instead, I grabbed my coat from the chair and walked toward the door. Where are you going? She called after me, panic creeping in her voice. For a drive, I said without looking back. I need to clear my head. The door clicked shut behind me, and for the first time that night, the air felt breathable again. But even as I drove through the empty streets, I couldn't escape the one question that haunted me. Was this the beginning of the end, or just a detour on a road we could still travel together? I drove aimlessly through the quiet streets, headlights cutting through the darkness, but my mind stayed stuck in that bedroom. I kept seeing them, Angela and the kid, tangled together in a scene that felt more like some cheap tabloid scandal than my reality. My grip tightened on the steering wheel, and I rolled down the window to let the cold air slap me back into focus. Eventually, I pulled into the parking lot of an all-night diner, the kind with neon lights buzzing and a flickering open 24 hours sign. I figured a cup of bad coffee might help clear the fog in my brain, but as I stepped inside, I realized something else was nagging at me. Why had the gardener, of all people, been the one to catch her attention? Was it really just loneliness? Or was there more to this mess than Angela had let on? I ordered a coffee, sat down at a booth by the window, and pulled out my phone. My fingers hovered over the screen as I debated what to do next. Then, against my better judgment, I did something I never thought I'd do. I looked him up. The kid had an unusual last name, one I remembered from the paperwork we'd filled out when hiring him last summer. It didn't take long to find his social media profile. There he was, smiling in a dozen photos, most of them taken in our backyard. Angela's roses in full bloom behind him, the pool glistening under the sun. I scrolled further, and that's when things got weird. Among the usual photos of him mowing lawns and posing with friends, there was a picture of him in front of a fancy sports car captioned, "Dreams really do come true." The date on the photo was from last week. I knew for a fact he couldn't afford a car like that. Not on a gardener's salary. My instincts, already on high alert, kicked into overdrive. I left the diner without finishing my coffee, jumped into my car, and drove straight to his house. It was a small place on the edge of town, the kind of modest home you'd expect from a kid just starting out in life. His car, a rusty old truck, was parked in the driveway, but the sports car from the photo was nowhere in sight. I knocked on the door, my pulse racing. A few moments later, the door creaked open, and there he was, wearing a wrinkled t-shirt and pajama pants. His eyes widened when he saw me, and for a split second, he looked like a deer caught in headlights. "Mr. Sanders," he stammered, shifting nervously. "I didn't think. What are you doing here?" "I think you know," I said, my voice cold and steady. "Can we talk?" He hesitated, but eventually stepped aside, letting me into the small living room. The place was cluttered with video games, empty soda cans, and textbooks scattered across the coffee table. I stood there, arms crossed, while he awkwardly scratched the back of his neck. "I get it," I said, breaking the silence. "You made a mistake. But here's the thing. I'm not just here because of Angela. I saw your photo. The car. You want to explain how an 18-year-old gardener suddenly has the kind of money to drive that?" His face paled, and he took a step back. "It's not what you think." "Oh, really? Because right now, I'm thinking you either hit the lottery or you've been cashing in on more than just lawn care." He swallowed hard, avoiding my gaze. "It was a gift," he mumbled. "A gift from who?" He didn't answer, but his silence told me everything I needed to know. My blood boiled as the pieces started falling into place. Angela hadn't just betrayed me emotionally. There was money involved. "How much did she give you?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He flinched like I'd struck him. "It wasn't like that," he said quickly. "She just helped me out a little. I had some bills and she—" "How much?" I interrupted, my fists clenching at my sides. He sighed, shoulders slumping in defeat. 15 grand. $15,000. My wife had handed over more money than some people made in a year to a kid she barely knew, all while I'd been working overtime, thinking I was building a future for us. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. "Does she even know you bought the car?" He shook his head. "No. I told her it was for medical bills. My mom was sick." I laughed bitterly, the sound echoing through the cramped room. "Let me guess. No one in your family is actually sick, are they?" He didn't answer. He didn't have to. I turned on my heel and headed for the door, but before I left, I glanced back at him one last time. "If I find out you've taken another penny from her, I'll make sure you regret it." The door slammed shut behind me, and I stood on the porch, breathing heavily. My heart raced, but it wasn't just from anger. It was from the realization that this wasn't just about an affair. Angela had been keeping secrets, and now I had to figure out how deep the betrayal went. As I drove home, my mind was spinning with questions. How long had she been giving him money? Was this her way of buying affection? Or had he manipulated her from the start? And, most importantly, what the hell was I supposed to do next? When I pulled into the driveway, the porch light was still flickering, casting its eerie glow over the lawn. I didn't know what I was walking into, but one thing was clear. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The house was dead silent when I stepped inside, the kind of silence that wasn't peaceful but suffocating. Angela was still in the kitchen, sitting in the same spot I'd left her. The bottle of wine was empty now, the second glass untouched. She didn't look up when I entered, but I could tell she knew I was there by the way her shoulders tensed. I dropped my keys on the counter and leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. My gaze stayed locked on her, waiting for her to say something. Anything. But she didn't. "You gave him 15 grand, I said, my voice slicing through the silence like a knife. Her head snapped up, eyes wide and red-rimmed. "What?" "I just came from his place. He told me everything." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. The weight of my words was enough to make her flinch. Angela's hands trembled as she pushed the empty wine bottle aside. I was trying to help him. His mom was sick." "Don't," I said, cutting her off. "We both know that's a lie. His mom isn't sick. He used you, Angela, and you let him." Tears spilled down her cheeks, but I didn't feel any pity. Not anymore. I'd given her the benefit of the doubt once tonight, and she'd shattered it. "I didn't know," she sobbed. "I thought he needed the money. I didn't mean for it to get this far. I let out a bitter laugh. So, what exactly did you think was going to happen when you started handing him wads of cash? Did you think he'd mow the lawn a little faster? Or did you know exactly what you were paying for? Her face crumpled, and for a second, I thought she might collapse. But she held herself together just enough to choke out, "I didn't pay him for that. I swear. It wasn't like that." "Then explain it to me," I said, my tone sharp. "Because right now, it looks like you bought yourself a boy toy and handed him enough money to live out his wildest dreams." "I didn't mean for any of this to happen," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "It started with the money because he told me his family was struggling. I felt sorry for him. And then, I don't know, I was lonely, and he was there, and it just spiraled." I leaned forward, gripping the edge of the counter. "So, you felt sorry for him, and that somehow justified throwing away our marriage?" Angela sobbed harder, burying her face in her hands. "I'm sorry," she repeated, like it was some magic spell that could fix the mess she'd made. "I didn't plan any of this. I just wanted to feel something." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I'd spent years working to provide for us, thinking that stability and financial security were enough. But apparently, what she'd really needed was someone to make her feel seen. I couldn't decide if that made me angrier or just sadder. I paced the kitchen, my mind racing. "You do realize he's 18, right? What happens when he decides to tell someone about this? Have you thought about what that could do to you? To me?" Angela looked up, her face pale. "He won't tell anyone. He promised." "You're trusting the word of a kid who lied about his mom being sick to scam you out of 15 grand? I shook my head, disbelief washing over me. "You're smarter than this, Angela. Or at least, I thought you were." She stood up from the table, her legs unsteady like she could barely hold herself up. "Please," she begged, her voice cracking. "Don't give up on me. On us. I know I messed up, but I'll do anything to fix this. I'll get the money back. I'll cut him off. I'll go to therapy, whatever it takes." I stared at her, the woman I'd built a life with, now reduced to someone I didn't recognize. Part of me wanted to believe her, to cling to the hope that we could somehow rebuild what she'd destroyed. But the other part of me, the part that had seen her in bed with someone else, heard her admit to giving him money, and watched her beg for forgiveness, knew it wasn't that simple. "Do you even love me?" I asked, the question slipping out before I could stop it. She took a step toward me, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, I never stopped." This wasn't about love. It was about me being stupid and selfish, and you thought I wouldn't notice? I interrupted. "That you could have your little fling, throw some money at him, and I'd never find out?" She shook her head violently. "No, I knew it would catch up to me. I was just too scared to stop." I exhaled sharply and leaned against the wall, my thoughts a jumbled mess. I didn't know what scared me more, that she'd been capable of doing this in the first place, or that she thought she could fix it with promises and apologies. "I need time," I said finally. "I can't make any decisions tonight. I don't even know what to think right now." Angela nodded, her sobs quieting down. "Take all the time you need. Just please don't leave me." I didn't respond. I couldn't. Instead, I turned and walked upstairs to the guest room, where I locked the door behind me and collapsed onto the bed. My mind replayed everything she'd said, every tear she'd shed, every excuse she'd given. As the night dragged on, I stared at the ceiling, wondering if there was any version of this story where we didn't end up broken beyond repair. Morning came too soon, dragging its pale light through the window like it wanted to expose everything I'd tried to push away during the night. I hadn't slept. My mind had run circles around me, replaying every memory, every conversation, every sign I should have seen but didn't. Angela had made coffee. I could smell it wafting up the stairs. I wasn't ready to face her yet, but I knew hiding in the guest room wasn't going to solve anything. When I walked into the kitchen, she was sitting at the table, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug. Her eyes were puffy and red, and the exhaustion on her face mirrored my own. "I didn't know if you'd come down," she said softly. I ignored the small talk and grabbed a cup of coffee, taking a seat across from her. The tension between us was suffocating. Neither of us knew where to start, so the silence stretched on until I couldn't take it anymore. I need you to tell me everything, I said, my voice firm. No more half-truths. No more lies. If we have any chance of fixing this, I need the whole story. Angela swallowed hard and nodded. Okay, she whispered. She started at the beginning, how the kid had been polite, helpful, always asking about her day while trimming the hedges or mowing the lawn. How? At first, she saw him as nothing more than a friendly face. But then, somewhere along the line, their conversations had shifted. He'd started complimenting her, noticing things I hadn't. Her hair, her dress, the way she carried herself. I know how pathetic that sounds, she said, staring down at her mug. But I was starving for attention. And when he gave it to me, I didn't know how to stop myself. I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to stay quiet, and let her continue. The first time I gave him money, I thought I was helping him. He told me his family was struggling, and I believed him. But then he kept asking, and I kept giving. And somewhere along the way, it stopped being about the money. I started looking forward to seeing him. I started craving the way he made me feel. And that led to the bedroom, I said, my voice cold. She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. It only happened once. That night. I don't know why I let it go that far, but I did. And I hate myself for it. I rubbed my hands over my face, trying to process everything she'd just admitted. So, what now? I asked, looking at her through tired eyes. Do you expect me to just forget about this? Pretend it never happened? No, she said quickly. I know I can't ask for that, but I want to fix this. I want to fix us. I'll do whatever it takes. I stood up from the table, pacing the kitchen as my mind raced. Her words sounded sincere, but sincerity didn't erase betrayal. And as much as I wanted to believe we could come back from this, part of me knew that trust, once shattered, was nearly impossible to rebuild. I met with him last night, I said suddenly, stopping in my tracks. Angela's face paled. You what? I went to his house. I wanted to know exactly what kind of mess you dragged me into. I took a step closer, my gaze locking onto hers. And you know what I found out? He used you, lied to you, took your money and spent it on a car. Did you even know about that? Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The shock on her face told me everything I needed to know. She hadn't known. You were so desperate for validation that you couldn't even see the red flags. I continued, my voice rising. You handed him thousands of dollars and gave him access to our home, our life, without thinking about the consequences. I didn't know, she sobbed, covering her face with her hands. I didn't know he was lying. I thought. Yeah, well, you thought wrong. My fists clenched at my sides, the anger bubbling to the surface. And now I'm supposed to clean up the mess, right? Figure out how to trust you again. How to rebuild what you destroyed. Her sobs turned into gasps, her shoulders shaking uncontrollably. Please, she begged, don't give up on me. Don't give up on us. I turned away, staring out the window as the morning sun painted the world in gold. For the first time since I'd walked into that bedroom last night, I realized that my anger wasn't just about the betrayal. It was about the fact that I still loved her. Despite everything, despite the lies and the betrayal, I wasn't ready to let go. But love alone wasn't enough. I turned back to her, my voice steady but filled with finality. You're going to get the money back, I said. Every penny. I don't care how you do it, but you're going to fix that part of the mess. And after that, we'll see where we stand. But right now, I need space. I need time. Angela nodded through her tears, her shoulders sagging as if the weight of her actions had finally crushed her. I'll do it, she whispered. I'll do whatever it takes. I didn't respond. Instead, I grabbed my coat and headed for the door. As I stepped outside, the cool morning air hit me, clearing my head just enough to realize one thing. This wasn't over. Not for me. Not for her. We were stuck in a limbo where love and betrayal coexisted, and I had no idea which one would win in the end. For now, though, I'd give her the chance to fix what she could. But as I walked down the street, I couldn't shake the feeling that no matter how much she tried to undo the damage, some cracks were permanent. And maybe, just maybe, this was one of them.